Okay, Rebecca, take it away.
Welcome, everybody. The title of this webinar is Beyond Education, Overcoming Psychological Barriers to Behavior Change. And you probably just heard that we are recording this webinar. During the Q&A, if you want to ask a question but you don't want it recorded, please indicate in the chat, or you can direct message Sydney to request that we pause the recording. So we are the Shoreline and Coastal Planners Group, and I'm Rebecca Rothwell. I work for the Department of Ecology at headquarters in the C program, and I've been with ecology for about 17 years now. I need to update the slide. And Sydney Fishman is with the Washington Sea Grant, and she joined there in 2023, and she's a coastal management specialist. The Shoreline and Coastal Planners Group is a collaborative project of the Washington Sea Grant and the Washington State Department of Ecology. We're an educational group of coastal planners working for the federal, state, local, and tribal governments, nonprofits, conservation districts, and private consultants. We represent a multidisciplinary group of individuals. I'm going to pass this to Sydney.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Sydney Fishman. Thank you so much for being here this morning. We're really excited to be able to offer AICP CM credits for this webinar. So if you're someone who's interested in these credits, know that we'll have more information about this at the end of the webinar and also in the follow-up email that we send. So hopefully this can help some folks out. Today's event is guided by the Washington Sea Grant Engagement Code of Conduct, which is available on our website and also with this QR code. We're not expecting any issues, of course. I'm really excited to have this crowd, but because we are having a larger crowd today, we just expect everyone to leave space for one another, especially because this is going to be a pretty interactive session and our speakers are looking forward to hearing your perspectives. And please, we just ask everyone to treat each other with respect, dignity. There's going to be a lot of sharing in this presentation. So please just know that we're guided by this code of conduct. If you have any questions about this, feel free to reach out to me privately if you'd like, and you can find more information on the Sea Grant website. And with that, we'll go ahead and dive right in. Please feel free to share your questions in the chat. Note that because we are having a pretty large group today, everyone's going to be muted during the presentation section. We are going to record the presentation and the Q&A so that we can share it later on the Coastal Planners Group website. And we will be able to pause upon request. Feel free to reach out to me directly or put it in the chat if you'd like that. And then our presenters are also going to have more details about the recording. So with that, I will pass it to Kyle and Allison, and I'll spotlight them. And please, folks, take it away. Thank you for joining.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here with us today. We are really excited. We're going to discuss why education doesn't usually translate into behavior change and some communication approaches that can improve education-focused behavior change strategies. And so today we will go through 4 psychological barriers to communications and some suggestions on how to meet and work with those barriers. We will talk about how these barriers limit the effectiveness of education-only approaches and why communication strategies must be audience-centered, place-based, emotionally informed, and delivered through trusted local messengers. We will use relevant examples to highlight how community-centered communication can better support informed and equitable coastal decision-making. And so my name is Allison Morgan. I am one of 2 Washington Sea Grant Hirschman Fellows at the Puget Sound Institute. And I'm also one of 2 speakers today, and I will let my co-speaker introduce herself.
Hi, good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. I'm Kyle Clifton. I'm a social scientist in the Human Dimensions Lab at Oregon State University, and I get to do a lot of my work with the Puget Sound Partnership. And so because of that, I get to be based up in Washington, which is fantastic. And I'm just here today to add some color commentary to a lot of the content that's covered in the report authored by Allie.
Before we get going, I wanted to take care of a few housekeeping things or rules for engagement. As Sydney said, this webinar will be recorded and available for registrants and non-registrants housed on the SPCG webpage. If you would like to not be recorded or would feel more comfortable participating anonymously, we're going to just take a minute and allow time for you to change your name on Zoom and well, your camera's off or turn your camera off. And I'm going to put a link in the chat now that will tell you how to change your name on different devices, if that's something that would make you feel more comfortable. And right now you can't unmute yourself, but during the Q&A, you can request to unmute. You can also use the chat feature. And another option is to direct message or email us after the webinar. And we're happy to answer questions or address comments in any way you feel comfortable. Okay, so we're going to take just a minute for those who do want to change their name.
And it might be the case that I turned off cameras for all of the participants, I think just to save bandwidth, but people are able to rename themselves.
At the risk of moving ahead too quickly, if you are working through renaming yourself, I'd like to move on to a little more of getting warmed up and into the webinar for today. So you can use your phone to scan this QR code and it will open a Mentimeter poll in the browser. In your browser on your phone, or I've got the link here in the chat you can use also. And so what we're going to do just to kind of get a little warmed up today, and we're going to use this Mentimeter tool later in the presentation as well when we're a little bit more in the discussion portion. So this is just to familiarize yourself with this if you haven't before. And so we'll call this a pretend, emphasis on the pretend personality quiz. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing the slide, and then I'll be able to share with you guys the, oops, there we go. So let me share with you the results as they're coming in. Oh, I'm a little surprised at how many people are lonely onlys. I think I'm pretty consistently 3 beverage containers. And this, I think, just to be fair, we can include maybe if you have yesterday's beverage containers still on your desk today, let's go ahead and count it, even if it's empty. Okay, two's late surge for 2. I like it. Maybe I should have done a tea versus coffee, but I feel like just liquids generally is good to know. All right, we've still got some responses coming in, but I think it's kind of slowing down to a trickle. And I think we still have a pretty clear winner of the lonely onlys. I'm impressed and proud of all of you for for sticking to a single drink and not spreading yourself too thin. I think that bodes well. All right, I can move on to the next question, which is, would you rather fight one horse-sized duck, that's a big duck, or 100 duck-sized horses? Let's assume you're in a neutral room with turf as flooring, and no tools available. It's just you all on your own against either one horse-sized duck or 100 duck-sized horses. Oh, okay. That's a big duck, guys. But focus on one thing only. I see it. I see it. Oh, yeah. And I'm just looking at the chat. I like the clarifying questions for the beverage. Um, all right. We're starting to slow down to a trickle. I think again, we have a pretty clear winner here. One horse-sized duck, which, maybe parallels nicely with the one beverage container only on the desk. So I'm seeing some great consistency. Okay, so our third and final question on the warm-up poll here is maybe the most fun. I'm assuming a lot of you or most of you live in Washington, or maybe you get to travel to Washington sometimes. So you can type in, where are you most excited to travel in Washington this year? And pretty loosey-goosey on the rules here. It can be city, region, park, maybe habitat. Maybe you're getting out to some shrub step. Underrated, I believe, in Washington. Oh, San Juan Islands, fantastic. Lots of islands. Ozette Coast Trail is gorgeous. I got to backpack in that area last summer. North Cascades. I'm hoping we start getting some more for all of these locations. I'm hoping we start getting some more winter weather. So there's some moisture going into the sunnier seasons. Metau, Oregon coast. Okay. We'll count it. It's the region. It's the Pacific Northwest region. Snowy, yeah, snowy Cascades. Snowy Cascades. Mm, okay, we've got at least two of the volcanoes are in here. Eastern Washington, yes. I'm based out just over the pass a little bit in Roslyn. So I feel like I'm trying to represent more this side, Eastern Washington. Oh, and maybe some folks are getting some inspiration for where they might want to travel today too. Okay, I think starting to slow down. Um, this is making me excited to get out this year. We're at the top of the year, so we can be as optimistic as we want to be about how much we're going to get out and play. Yeah, SeaTac Airport. That's which just hopefully means you're getting and traveling even beyond to somewhere fantastic. Um, okay, I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up there. Great to hear and see how much you guys are going to get out and enjoy Washington and beyond this year. So let me exit out of that. I've got a lot of stuff going here, and then I'm going to jump back to our presentation slides. Okay. All right, so we're warmed up, we're ready to go, and we're just about right on time, which is incredible. We'll see how perfectly we can stick to this as we continue today. But again, we're really happy to be here. The next about 30 minutes will be presentation based, where Allie and I will be kind of hot potatoing some content back and forth, using slides to share some information from Allie's report, and then also I'm going to be offering a little bit of background information. So kind of a very light, hopefully easy to understand and digestible, some background psychological knowledge on some of the barriers identified in Allie's report. Then we'll have about 15 minutes to either take a quick breather and any Q&A from the presentation portion. And then we'll reserve the last 30 minutes-ish to work through, to talk through and discuss some of the challenges that were submitted by you guys when you registered for the event. So we pulled some of those. Maybe you'll see your comment represented or summarized or quoted. And so we can talk through some of those challenges and strategies. And so we hope that that can be a little bit more engaging also. So we're hoping to minimize just the straight presentation, one-way direction of information. And please remember to utilize the chat. Allie and I will monitor it as best we can as we're presenting, but attention is a little bit limited. And then always remember that, and we can revisit the chat more so in the Q&A. And then always remember we'll have our emails on some slides later, and the slides will be presented after or provided after the presentation. So you guys can also always reach out asynchronously. So outside of this webinar live via email. So we've got that as an option too. Allie.
Okay, here we go. So our talk today is stemming from my critical analysis, which is titled Bridging Policy and Public Perception, Effective Communication of Shoreline or Marine Trade-offs in Coastal Communities. My critical analysis discusses barriers to communication, specifically in shoreline communities, and some suggestions on how to acknowledge, meet, and work with those barriers. My central research question is, how can local governments, advocacy organizations, and others effectively communicate these trade-offs associated with each response option to shoreline property owners and other constituents? And this is looking specifically at shoreline armoring. Given that Puget Sound forecasts anticipate and are currently seeing an increased frequency of extreme water level events, the pressure feels sort of on to protect private properties and shoreline communities. And this question was ranked highly at the HSIL 2024 Fall Forum, Planning for Sea Level Rise and Climate Hazards to Nearshore Habitat in Puget Sound. To begin addressing this question, I looked closely at the Shore Friendly program, which is widely considered a leading example of best practices in shoreline stewardship. And what makes the program particularly effective is its emphasis on personalized support, clear communication tools, hands-on guidance, and one-on-one engagement that helps to demystify the restoration process and build confidence in decision-making. And underpinning all of their work is a social marketing strategy, which was developed with key partners, designed to encourage voluntary behavior change and promote more sustainable community-centered shoreline practices. In my analysis, I also used a study done by researchers at Washington Sea Grant who identified 3 core trade-offs that shape shoreline armoring decisions. And then I added a 4th one to that. And together these form what I call the 4 dimensions of shoreline armoring trade-offs. And they are financial, social, ecological, and those are the 3 from the Sea Grant research study. And then I added regulatory. Importantly, every shoreline management option, whether it's hard armor, soft armor, accommodation, or retreat, requires navigating all 4 of these dimensions at once. The shift toward more sustainable shorelines is often met by psychological barriers that can cause an unconscious hurdle to overcome. And my analysis critically evaluates communication strategies that can more effectively convey shoreline management trade-offs to property owners in the Puget Sound region, helping to overcome those barriers. And I drew on social science frameworks. The research shows that communication is most effective when it aligns with a homeowner's existing values and helps to directly address their specific concerns. And Kyle is now going to walk us through why education doesn't always equal behavior change.
Thank you. And I apologize for my mouse moving all over the slide. I didn't realize y'all could see it, and I was trying to catch up on the Zoom chat. So I apologize. I'll try to keep it on lock next time and use my other screen. But yes, so in a lovely, wonderful, clean, but sadly robotic world, we have a situation where information provision results in behavior change. And so what we call this is the information deficit model. And generally the stages in this are where an expert, you can tell they're an expert by the mortarboard cap they've got there. The expert shares information. The audience hears exactly that information. They understand exactly that information. They accept exactly that information. They adopt exactly that information. And so then that results in behavior change. But while it does complicate things, a world I would rather live in is less robotic. And that is the world that we do live in. And so in that instance, you've got your card-carrying expert. The expert shares information on which they hold expertise. However, there is a barrier there that can prevent the audience from hearing, understanding, accepting, adopting that information. And there's lots of reasons for that. And so some could be risk perception, identity of the audience, the beliefs that the audience holds, trust that they have with the expert sharing, or distrust that they hold with the expert sharing that information. They also might not understand that information. You may say salmon, they may hear giraffe. And now that's making me think of like the teeny tiny duck-sized horses from the questions, and now I'm thinking of a very lap-sized giraffe, which would also be adorable. And furthermore, for that final stage for information to equate to behavior change, you have sometimes what we might call more practical barriers that can prevent behavior change from happening. That can be the opportunity, the capability of the individual or the broader audience, social norms acting on that person that they may be aware of or unaware of. And so in the grand majority of instances, information provision does not result in behavior change. You will get some perfectly, like, you may get the perfect audience member, but it's probably going to be, I don't know, maybe 5, maybe 10 out of 100 folks. And so that's really not enough to move the needle the way that we want to and need to affect meaningful habitat change or ecological change in the systems, in the social ecological systems in which we live and play and work. So we're going to talk through the 4 psychological barriers identified in Allie's report today. And so we're going to start with social values and norms. So I'll give you a little bit of the nerdy nitty-gritty behind the scenes, and then Allie will give you a little bit more of the so what. So we've got individual values, which can be held collectively by a group. And so values include beliefs. So this is what you believe to be true, or what you think you know to be true, about how desirable or undesirable certain end states are. These values are guiding principles for how we evaluate other people, things that are happening to us, contexts we find ourselves in, behaviors that we do or don't want to adopt, again, to achieve those certain end states. These are formed really early in life, both a nature and a nurture situation. They're very deeply tied to identity. And because it is such a foundation, such a bedrock of who we are as individuals and what we think is good or desirable, they're very, very resistant to change. And so there's a lot of ways that we can talk about values and the way that we use the word value kind of more colloquially. And when we're in this field of psychology, we're a little more specific about what we mean when we talk about values, which I just talked through. And, they transcend situations. And so they're also ranked. So some values will come to the fore for you more than others. And so generally some buckets we can put these values in include conservatism. And so that would be security. So that, safety, financial security, conformity, tradition. Another bucket of values includes self-enhancement, and we don't need to attach any sort of like that's good or bad to it. It's just it is what it is, and they can manifest in a lot of different ways. And so that could be looking for power or achievement. And so I am a card-carrying PhD, and so in some ways achievement was important to me. That was a value, or that is a value that I hold. Um, Another bucket is openness to change. And so this is hedonism, wanting to feel good, have fun, stimulation, self-direction. So this is maybe your friend who decided to, or you who decided to bike pack all the way down the western coast of South America. And they were out for, 21 months. And oh my God, they had so many crazy experiences. And so that is someone whose self-direction is important, stimulation is important, having fun is and filling their cup with these experiences is very important for them. So kind of hedonistic values. And then a fourth bucket is self-transcendence. And so this includes benevolence. And so that is being kind and helping and caring very much for people who are like you. And then it also includes universalism, which is benevolence, but broader. So it's beyond people who are in your in group. So it's people in the other political party. It's people who enjoy hobbies or hold values that are different than yours. And it includes non-human species. So your umbrella of who you want to care about and support isn't all who's, it's a lot of what's. And so, of course, a lot of folks, unsurprisingly, who choose a career like nursing, teaching, conservation, or natural resource management, you might hold some of those universalism and benevolence values pretty highly. So norms then, in many ways, build off of these individual and social group values. And norms are how we ought to behave. So it's not codified, it's not laws, it's not your HOA guidelines. This is just social or personal pressure we put on ourselves for how we ought to behave. These are, rules, standards, again, kind of unwritten, not codified rules. And so these you can hold for yourself, and it can be not taking into regard other people in your household. Maybe your parent puts everything in the trash, and maybe you go through later and pull something out and put that in the recycling because that's a personal norm of yours. There are also social norms. And so this is your belief as an individual of what people around you think you ought to do. And so sometimes that can be in conflict with personal norms. So I'm trying to think of an example here on the fly. Well, I can use the recycling one again. No one in your family can recycle, but your personal norm is to recycle. So sometimes there can be some tension there about how to behave in certain situations. Are you at home? Are you at your folks' house for Thanksgiving? And then an important sub category, I suppose, of norms are subjective norms. So these are norms, these are beliefs that you hold about what people important to you think about how you ought to behave. So I find myself standing on a bridge, I'm surrounded by 20 people. They're all jumping off the bridge into the river below. They're hooting and hollering, they're having a great time. The social norm is, hey, we are doing this behavior. Clearly, we think this behavior is something you ought to do also. Look at the fun we're having. But I hear that voice in my head of my mother. My mother is very important to me. And so I have a subjective norm that my mother says, just because everyone else is jumping off the bridge doesn't mean you should jump off the bridge. And so again, there can be some tension between these different normative pressures that we hold, and it can really shape how we believe or how we behave rather. And so sometime, I think I'll kick it to Allie now.
Okay, so for a single person, the most consequential effects on their beliefs about climate change are likely to result from their relations with their peers. And as Kyle touched on, values are often formed early and remain very stable throughout their lives. And environmental outcomes are often emotionally and politically charged, which makes, communication hard when you're up against that social norm and value. And so, for it to be more effective here, it needs to align with the person or community's existing values rather than strictly, appealing to the ecological or even financial concerns. And some great examples that I touch on in the analysis would be the Duwamish River Community Coalition, which offers culturally responsive outreach and immediate flood response services to frontline residents. And they help to bridge gaps in trust and accessibility. The Duwamish River Community Coalition works to center and amplify the voices of communities most affected by pollution and environmental injustice along the Duwamish River. Their mission focuses on building community power and resilience to support a cleaner, healthier, and more equitable river for both people and the ecosystems that depend on it. Another really good example is the Swinomish Community Environmental Health. They support well-being in the Swinomish way by recognizing health is more than just physical outcomes. And so in their framework, a healthy community reflects Swinomish relationships, values, and priorities, and includes physical, social, mental, and cultural well-being at individual, family, and community levels, leading with the reciprocity in relationships between people, the natural environment, and non-human beings. I think we'll jump into our next barrier.
Okay, so our next barrier is, of the four that we're talking about today, is risk perception. So risk perception is an individual's subjective judgment. So it's how they feel about what risk is associated with some sort of behavior, some sort of activity, some sort of event. And this can be something happening to them or how they're behaving in the world. And this includes technology, and think technology, it can be literal. We can think about our judgment about the risk of using AI. So it could be that kind of literal technology. And you can also think about technology more broadly in terms of approaches. So of course, for this audience, shoreline armoring. So we can think about technology as, hey, it's this different approach if we want soft shore as opposed to hard armoring. So think about technology both literally and kind of broadly here. And again, happily, because we are not robots, your risk perception, your judgment about how risky something is really shaped a lot more by your personal experience than by statistical likelihood. And so this is called the availability heuristic. Heuristic is another way to say that is just kind of a mental shortcut. So your brain can't actually take in all of the information all the time. So we've got these handy dandy shortcuts that allow us to function in our day-to-day lives that have developed for really good reasons. And so this availability heuristic is if you can pull up an example of it happening to you or happening to someone you know about, oh, my neighbor had that, that happened to my cousin. It might feel that the risk is a lot more real or it's a bigger risk than is the actual statistical likelihood. So these are things like shark attack. Really not very likely at all. You're much more likely to get attacked by a dog, but you read about, or maybe you know someone who had a shark encounter. And so when you're in the ocean, you think about it, right? Even though the chances of that, maybe especially if you're in the ocean in Australia or South Africa, even though the chances of that happening are actually very, very small, and it was much more risky for you to make the drive to the beach. This risk perception is also influenced by your emotions because, again, happily, we are not robots, and your personal characteristics. And so there's a tie there with the values that we talked about previously. And then there's also a bias called optimism bias. Some people might have this more so than others. Maybe you are the happy optimist who is inspiring, or you might identify more as a realist or a pessimist, but you've got that friend who always has the helpfully sunny disposition, and that can really kind of just help you get out and try stuff sometimes. So the optimism bias is a really useful bias to have. There's also risk aversion, which causes individuals to prefer what they feel is safer. And a lot of times that's things that are familiar to them. This is unsurprising. Maybe sometimes you go to a restaurant and there's something on the menu that kind of interests you, but you know that chicken Alfredo is going to totally slap. And so it's a safe bet. If you're spending $28 on a main course anyway, you might as well get something that you know is going to be tasty and satisfying. And we'll move on to Allie for some of the so what.
I am the creature of habit at a restaurant, by the way. So Kyle just walked us through what risk is, and I'm going to take us through a couple of types of risk, social and psychological risk. So social risk refers to the fact that many of our choices are visible to others and become part of our public identity. People may worry about how friends, neighbors, or colleagues will interpret their choices, whether they'll be questioned, judged, or quietly dismissed. Even the possibility of social scrutiny can make someone hesitant to act, especially if a decision challenges what feels normal or expected within their peer group. Psychological risk often follows closely behind social risk. When people experience criticism, teasing, or disapproval from those around them, it can affect their confidence and self-esteem. And over time, the internal response can become a barrier in its own right, discouraging future action, even when the choice itself is reasonable or beneficial. Social and psychological risk speak to the social values and norms that we previously discussed, highlighting how much and internalized the risks that are perceived are and how it can threaten one's personal identity. This can create a bit of fear for an individual, fear of isolation, fear of identity loss, fear of scrutiny, etc. And so similar to values, here we want to emphasize collective action and show neighbors working together when looking to overcome social and psychological risk barriers. To overcome other types of risks like temporal, functional, or physical, an example for shoreline armoring would be using property-specific examples and 3D visualizations of shoreline change or flood conditions. Visuals and narratives of past high water events can highlight how solutions could reduce current and future risks, framing costs in terms of avoided future damages, which unfortunately would feel very relevant right now. And I'll pass it back to Kyle to go through our next barrier.
All right, so our third of 4 barriers today is related to risk perception, and we're going to talk through distal theory. So this is when risks are spatially, so geographically, oh, that happened in a different county or a different state, or temporally distant, so time-wise. And so, of course, climate change is often a lot of this temporally distant is often conceived as a temporally distant threat. It can be especially hard to relate threats that seem far away to your own experience. And so you view that threat in really abstract terms. It's really hard to imagine and think about it happening to you, and so to plan for and behave for it. Another word for this is temporal discounting. And so it's a kind of bias that exists, and it's specific to, again, things that are time-wise distant. And so they're viewed as just less significant than immediate outcomes. So, yeah, I understand there's a risk of flooding, but my property's in the 100-year floodplain, and I understand that to mean that it will only happen once in 100 years, or I understand that to mean that it will only happen 100 years from now. And that threat, that risk really is small compared to the outcome that I'll experience if I do something now for that, because the immediate outcome is effort, is cost, is hassle. And so it's really understandable that you would be resistant to behave on something, to act on something that you feel is not a big threat to you. And yeah, 50 is the new 100. Yeah. Um, and yes, that terminology is misleading, and that's how a lot of folks understand it, unfortunately. So, this is seems like it's a really understandable and familiar for you guys, and just so that we can all recognize, we do this too. It isn't only other folks that do this. Last night, I heard an animal in my attic space, and I thought to myself, ooh, it's probably best to get on this right away, but it's also just about my bedtime, and I'm very sleepy. And, maybe it'll work its way out. And so I'm going to go ahead and put this off, and I'm going to deal with this tomorrow after the webinar. So we'll see if that's what my afternoon activity is. But, just to say there are so many big and small ways that we all come up against this same discounting, and we behave in a way that very often or very usually maximizes immediate low effort and puts off future effort.
Oh, we only ever experience the present moment, as Kyle just walked us through, and we can directly experience past or the future, distant places, or alternative versions of reality, unfortunately. And yet, our memories, expectations, and hopes and imagined possibilities profoundly shape how we feel and how we decide what to do next. And so, distal theory kind of helps to explain why people often struggle to respond to those threats that feel really distant in time or space. When threats such as sea level rise or flooding are framed abstractly through statistics, projections, or future scenarios, they are difficult to connect to everyday experience and therefore less likely to prompt protective action. Without a personal and emotional anchor, these distant threats remain theoretical rather than actionable. And effective communication here reduces the psychological distance by grounding communication about the risks in local and lived experience. And so using the recent high water events provides a clear example of how abstract climate threats become tangible. For some communities, this could be the December 2022 high water event. For others, it was the most recent December 2025 flooding. And linking these lived events to ongoing and emerging climate threats helps to sort of underscore their immediacy and relevance, particularly for residents who experience them firsthand. During the December storm, for example, that the Skykomish River near Gold Bar reached approximately 111,000 cubic feet per second, exceeding what is typically considered a 100-year flood. And so framing risk through events people remember and or live through would transform their climate impacts from distant possibilities to present realities, making their need for protective action more salient. And on to our last barrier.
Okay, so our fourth and final barrier is, again, something that is probably going to feel very familiar to you guys, but maybe we can help to assign some technical language to it so that we can better understand it in a way that we can address it. And that is trust. So there is a whole area of study called trust ecology. And so this applies to group situations. It accounts for both your pre-existing tendencies as an individual, of the trust as a truster, and your interpersonal reactions. So that could be one-on-one reaction or interaction. That could be an interaction with you and an organization or an entity. And within trust ecology, researchers have identified four kinds of trust. So one is dispositional. This is just your baseline as an individual, what you're kind of inclined to, how much you're inclined to trust individuals, organizations, processes, situations. This can be based on past experiences. It's often very influenced also on the culture within which you exist. Um, and yeah, it's really just kind of a baseline. So this is your starting point of if you're going to be inclined to trust or not to trust. Then we have rational trust, which is the truster's evaluation, your judgment about what you think the likely outcomes of potential trustees' likely actions are going to be. So, do I think I can accurately anticipate what you're going to do and what those outcomes for me specifically, because we're all about me, what those outcomes for me are going to be? Third, we have affinitive trust. So this is just your affinity for the trustee, again, as an individual or an organization. This can be based on positive shared experiences, how socially connected you are, so how much you see that you are like this person, or you know, oh, I know it's that 3 degrees of separation, or I know 4 people who bowl with Todd. Um, and this can really be built through actually caring and listening to the person. It can also just be a perception of a shared identity. So this can be, oh, I don't know anyone who works for, oh, let me try. I'm trying to think of I don't know anyone who works for a nonprofit, let's say, but I really care about environmental nonprofit. Like I see myself as an environmentalist. I care about the pandas. And so while I know no one and I've had no interaction with anyone at an environmental nonprofit, I'm going to go ahead and trust that the work that they're doing is good and right and appropriate. So that can be just kind of a perception of a shared identity, not actually based on experience, and assumption of similar values. So again, this affinitive trust can be through actual interaction, and it can be through perceptions of shared identity. And so the actual interaction, these demonstrations of caring, of listening, I hope you guys are seeing that as really a leverage point of something that can be actioned as you're interacting with folks to help build some of that affinitive trust. And then finally, there's systems-based or procedural trust. So this is your trust in the system or the procedures or the rules. So do I have, there's a lot of conversation right now about how there is waning or diminishing trust in the Supreme Court. That's because we don't have trust in the system or the procedures or the rules that they are creating and following and functioning through. And that's just no opinion stated on that. It's just something that has definitely been in the news lately. And so when you're, as an individual, operating in a system where you can have maybe some influence or maybe not, maybe you're just affected by the system, if you agree that how these rules were created are fair, then you can go ahead and place faith in the system of rules. And you're going to also place faith, trust, in that other folks will also comply, because you're going to assume I see this as fair, and so other folks are going to see this as fair. So I can anticipate their behavior, and so that will influence my behavior, that I'm going to get the outcomes that are good for me because we're all working toward this common goal that we decided was fair. And so I think a lot of the policies around armoring You can probably hear some relevance in this systems-based or this procedural trust for a lot of armoring or other environmental policies. And the reality or perception that some folks hold that they are not fair. And so that's really going to diminish that systems-based procedural trust. And it's going to undermine the likelihood that they will behave in a way that is in compliance or in a way that is otherwise desirable.
So without trust, outreach strategies fail to inspire action often. Trust can be undermined by several factors, including doubts about the communicator's competence, a perceived lack of care, inconsistent messaging, and a failure to meet expectations. Trust is built through relationships with local entities, perceived as familiar and responsive, going back to a good example of the Duwamish River Community Coalition, which is, a great example of a trusted local program. It's good to remember that trust is very, very fragile. And so even a single instance of an exaggerated claim can lead to widespread public skepticism. And so for communication here, we would want to actively partner with trusted community intermediaries. And you can think like co-hosted events with local conservation districts or neighborhood associations, offering consistent and easy to understand information, which would hopefully increase openness to new ideas. And so, looking ahead, improving engagement requires expanding both how and where we communicate. Importantly, the how is shaped by the where and by the who we are trying to reach. Communication barriers and opportunities vary widely from community to community and even from individual to individual. And this is why partnering within the community, those trusted local messengers is so critical. Messages are far more likely to resonate when they come from a familiar, credible source. And at the same time, communicators need to pay close attention to the emotional response that their messages evoke, because emotions play a central role in how people perceive risk and evaluate their choices. One practical step forward that I highlighted in my analysis is greater collaboration with social scientists and other interdisciplinary experts. Their insights can help identify the psychological and emotional barriers within communities and individuals and help guide the design of the communication strategies that would be more effective, empathetic, and responsive. And so to start, there are a billion resources for environmental psychology or sociology that would and could be useful here. But here are some additional resources for you if you're interested. We're happy to provide links in the chat for these, or you can email us and request them directly if you miss them here. So we have the links to my critical analysis and the infographic that comes with it. There is a link to the COM-B model, which is a practical framework to identify and address barriers to behavior change, including and beyond those discussed today. And then we have a fun science-based beach read titled The Influential Mind by Tali Sharrow, which is a research-based book on how we influence those around us and how understanding the brain can help us change minds for the better. And now I think we're going to go into our Q&A section, but we made it through the presentation.
I was just going to say, if folks want to put their questions in the chat, that's an option, or Kyle, let us know how best we can engage.
I just pop back one slide and we'll provide a PDF of the slide deck for today. And so it will have the QR codes, and I'll also make the QR codes clickable in the PDF. And I think, Sydney, y'all can share that around, right?
That's right. Yeah, folks will get an email. Everyone who registered will get an email, and it'll be on the Shoreline and Coastal Planners Group website. Yeah, if folks want to put some questions in the chat, I can help facilitate the Q&A.
Mhm.
And Kyle, how are we doing on time in terms of time for the Q&A?
Uh, we were hoping to transition to kind of the part two at the hour, at the top of the hour, but we also baked in some flex. So I don't want to cut folks off, and we'll have some more since we're kind of one way workshopping in a very light a light workshopping of some of the challenges submitted for registrants. So we've got 30 more minutes to keep asking questions and responding to some of the information and challenges that you guys submitted. So this isn't the last and final opportunity, but maybe let's say 5 minutes or so now. And this could also be if you need to just step away for a break, you can take that time now too.
Wonderful.
Someone put in the chat that the QR codes are not working for them.
Oh, let me test it right now.
Okay.
They won't be clickable, but so in this format, they are not clickable. It's working for me for my smartphone to pick up on the QR code. Um, Later, when we provide the PDF, the QR codes will be clickable, but they're not clickable in this format right now. I can drop the links in the chat, though, is what I can do.
And maybe while you do that, let's see, there was a question of kind of doing a demonstration. I know that in the next section, we're going to address some more of the practical challenges using real world examples that folks submitted. So hopefully that can help do a little bit of the demo, but maybe that's something we can revisit later. But yes, we're going to talk about some real world examples. And then there was also a question about trainings or other resources that folks can use to learn how to implement some of these strategies. Do either of you have any recommendations on that?
Um,
I'm sorry, you cut out in my headphones. Which question were you?
The question is, are there any trainings or other resources that can help folks learn how to implement these different strategies?
I can't think of any trainings off the top of my head. And I know I came across one when I was writing my paper, so I can circle back to you if you want to leave your email. Uh, Other resources, I think checking out the social marketing strategies. I know there was one posted in the chat. I can also, again, circle back with you with the one that I read and used in my analysis. And I can also send a few more like papers for you to read if you'd like it in that form. Um, and then there are some like online webinars about risk communication that I found really helpful. Again, I can link all that in an email. It would take me some time to pull all that back up, but I can. I'm happy to do that in an email for you.
Wonderful. And that's something also that we can share on the Shoreline and Coastal Planners Group website.
Perfect.
Let's see, how are we doing on time, Kyle?
let's maybe a few more minutes, I think will be fine.
Okay. Um, let's see. There was a question on how work with landowners applies to institutional behaviors. Is that something that either of you could address?
Uh, I'm not seeing it. I'm not sure institutional behaviors. I'm not sure what you mean. Oh, Lane. Lane, I'm not sure what you mean by institutional behaviors.
Maybe we'll, oh, agencies.
So behavior of agency employees within their agency. So agencies feeling kind of intractable on change themselves.
Yes, agency culture. Are there
Okay,
things, yeah, things that we can pull from these models to try to address agency culture?
totally. Definitely. And a little bit of grease on the tracks for that is that folks within an agency are very likely to share one element of their identity with each other, which is, why that they're working at that agency and why they decided to work at that agency. So you are more likely to be working within kind of an in-group situation, which can be useful. And influential there would be change agents, so particular individuals who are their values might be more likely to be higher for self-direction and stimulation, so they might be more willing to make a change themselves. It is a different area of study within institutional culture, though, because you do have different contexts of, what is potentially legally or policy wise allowed to, what the agency is allowed to do, how they're allowed to function. So there are some different, very relevant contexts there about the capability, which might be hindered. And so yes and no. Maybe an area that can offer a little more, some more ideas would be that COM-B model for behavior change. That is still not designed to be within an institutional context, but there are more tools in there to understand capability that could be relevant to an institutional context.
Thank you. Maybe also just we'll move on to the next portion. I know there's also great examples of folks helping each other out, sharing resources, engaging in discussion, which is awesome to see. But I want to make sure we have time to get to the input that we solicited during the registration. And I know Kyle and Allie have prepared an interesting segment for this, so maybe we'll jump to that.
Great. Well, we're in the final portion here. And so we're going to jump back to that Menti poll. And so I'll pull up the QR code here. Again, it's the same one. So if you still have it open, you can just keep operating in that. And the QR code, oops, that's the wrong link because I copied and pasted those other links. Let me quickly copy the link here and put it in the chat. And then I will stop sharing here and I'll jump to the Menti so we can start seeing some of the results. So I'll be doing some screen share jumping back and forth. So if you get motion sick, I apologize. I'll tell you when to close your eyes and when to open them. But let me go ahead and jump to the Menti poll. So we've got, oh shoot, and now it's covering it. I did not think this through super well, y'all. I apologize. But so we've got a few challenges that were submitted by registrants. I'll read them out here because now the interactive barcode is covering them up. So we're asking which psychological barrier that we covered today do you think these questions or comments represent? So we've got in minoritized communities, differences in culture and practices combined with the habits tied to their customs shape how education programs are effective. So this is, comment, observation, recommendation. And then we've got a similar comment or also a comment. Neighborhood projects are more successful at creating landowner buy-in than any government mandate. And then we've got a question, how to address the, typo, but my neighbors hardened their bank, so my shoreline may disappear unless I harden it, belief. So we've got some folks voting. A lot of y'all voting for social norms and values, absolutely. And it's kind of slowing down, so I'm going to go ahead and jump back to the slides. If you get motion sick, close your eyes. Okay. So social values and norms. So these are some challenges or observations submitted by y'all. And then Allie.
Yes, so just to review the communication here for social values and norms is often more effective when it aligns with the person or community's existing values rather than, strictly trying to appeal to financial or trying to get them to care about the ecological concerns. Again, I always go back because I just love them so much. The good example is the Duwamish River Community Coalition. They're very active in their community and they provide action based off of their community voices. Any discussion questions about these or the examples that we pulled up? We're happy to take those.
We can also move on to the next. I want to respect the pause. I know it takes a while for fingers to fly in the chat. So we can try and jump back if there's a little bit of a delayed question. I'm not seeing anything. I'm not seeing a notification in the chat. So we'll move on back in that mentees poll to our next psychological barrier. So if you get motion sick, close your eyes. I'm going to stop that share and I'm going to jump back to the Mentimeter. So we've got the same question. Which psychological barrier that we covered today do you think these registrant submitted questions or comments represent? And so we've got the fear of coastal erosion. We've got sea level rise and flooding, accelerating shoreline armor installation. We've got lack of understanding about risk. We have how to get shoreline homeowners to plant trees and replace armoring with soft shore methods. Okay, kind of slowing down. Oh, I forgot to share. Oh no, it is sharing, right? The Mentimeter. I'm jumping back and forth too much.
Yeah, we
Okay,
can see
so
it.
great. Okay, so strong lead for risk perception. And close your eyes if you get motion sick. I'm going to jump back to slides here. And definitely risk perception. So those were some of the challenges or observations submitted by y'all. And Allie can talk us through some of those strategies.
Yeah, so to review for risk, similar to values, emphasizing that collective action, showing neighbors working together when looking to overcome the social and psychological risk barriers. My example again is for shoreline armoring, so providing property-specific examples and 3D visualizations of the shoreline change or of flood conditions. Again, very, very relevant for a lot of homeowners right now, unfortunately. You can use narratives of those past high water events, 2022, 2025 now, and you can highlight, how insert whatever behavior change for your desired outcome, natural shorelines. So by maybe adopting a natural-based solution could reduce current and future risks to your property. And we'll pause again for any questions or chat that you want to have about this barrier.
I'm respecting the pause here and catching up on the chat a little bit too.
I'm not seeing anything. I'm seeing an active discussion on one of the comments that was going on, which is great. Oh, and it looks like Patrick just submitted something.
Mm. Mm.
maybe I'll read it out for folks who might be on the phone. The question was, any thoughts on how to communicate with folks when engineering predictions show that there genuinely isn't a way to gain an ecological benefit without compromising safety or the existence of a property? Like you could do something to soften the shoreline, but the house would have to move or be remodeled in some way to allow that to properly function and provide that risk protection.
Mhm.
Mm, I don't know if I have any great suggestions for that. I think those conversations are going to be really tough, um, because that's diminishing one's property, personal value. If they've lived in that home for generations, that's, a huge shift, for them. Um, but I think if I were going to try to tackle a situation like that, I would start with doing some more in-depth reading about risk communication, and maybe even touch on, and I didn't go through this in my analysis or in this presentation today, but sort of the 5 stages of grief, which I have found in some later research. People are going through these levels of grief with climate change and the adaptations they're having to make, and the loss of property and the loss of personal identity. So I think if I were going into that situation to try to have those conversations, that those are the 2 areas I would start researching in.
Mm. And I think in those instances, the same communication tools can be applied. It's just that it would be the threat and the ask is bigger of those individuals. And so particular care and time and trust would be necessary for those conversations. So not that tools in less extreme instances aren't applicable, but just that the time and understanding would similarly need to increase with the bigger ask of these folks. And I'm checking time. So I think let's go ahead and move on to the next Menti question. Close your eyes if you get motion sick. I'm going to stop share here. I'm going to move on to our third Menti question, and I'm going to share that as that comes in. So, move that on. All right. So we've got helping folks think long term about the cost and benefit of different choices. Resistance to future projections of climate change. Folks are only motivated when there's an emergency that impacts them. Recognition that floods will happen, but thinking it won't be them or it's a long way off. Okay. A lot of votes for distal theory and relatedly risk perception. Those are definitely related concepts there, because it just pulls into how we're considering risk, right? So I'm going to go ahead and jump. Close your eyes if you get motion sick. All right, so we've got distal theory. And Allie?
Yeah, so again, a reminder here, without a personal or emotional anchor, these distant threats remain theoretical rather than actionable. And so effective communication here, it would be grounding it in the local lived experience. And the best example I have right now is the recent flooding or the December 2022 event. I think, it's unfortunate that those are just very relevant, and that folks might be more responsive in this time thinking about floods. And I will pause again for any chat questions, anything that you have.
There was a question from Crystal. I'll read it out. How do we talk about the increasing flood risk due to sea level rise in low-lying coastal areas? It seems a long time into the future, but it is happening now.
Hmm. I think I would try to provide, again, a local example. And the first thing that comes to mind as someone who lived on Whidbey for a while, there's an area in Freeland, and it's right in front of, I'm blanking the name of the boat builder. They work on the ferries. It's right by the water. It's where they launch. It goes into the sound. Anyway, that is a very low-lying land, and it floods every single year. Nichols Brothers, thank you. Um, yeah, so that a whole area floods, and there are pictures of like how far it would come up and how it's just getting more and more and more. And so that could be a good relevant local example. You know, people who live in the area do know of Whidbey Island, so that might be helpful.
Um, all right, we'll jump to our fourth and final. Um, mentee question. So close your eyes if you get motion sick. I'll jump to the mentee page so y'all can see what's coming in. And so we've got support of politicians and implementation of the shoreline regulations. Distrust between tribe and non-tribal residents of reservation shoreline communities who are wary to engage. Or disinformation and distrust within coastal communities. Reluctance to share information about their shoreline developments and well water test results. Misunderstanding of funding sources, ecosystem science, and mistrust of the government. And I'm not sure. So the social norms and values, maybe if it's one person voting for that for all of these, and yes, I agree. Always relevant. And then, of course, we've got the word trust in there. So y'all had it easy on this one, and it's the fourth and final one. But definitely trust. A lot of these observations or questions or comments or challenges surround trust. And a lot of this is trust with government agencies or managers, be they tribal or Western. And so I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. So close your eyes if you get motion sick, and we'll jump back to the slides. Okay, you're safe. Um, and Allie.
Okay, so last reminder, trust is very, very fragile, and something I want to emphasize that I didn't as much in our presentation is that consistency in relationship building is really important here, not just consistency in messaging. And another thing I want to emphasize with trust is that trust takes time, and the rebuilding of trust takes time. And so again, that consistency here is going to be very, very important. And so for communication, actively partnering with someone that's already trusted in the community. My best example is a co-hosted event with a local conservation district or neighborhood association, and getting that information to be consistent every time and digestible so people can actually understand it. And again, pausing for comments in the chat, questions, anything.
There was a question earlier that I really liked and I think is
Love that.
relevant here, which is someone was asking something along the lines of, if working and partnering with local trusted messengers is really important, but those are often the folks who have the least resources and are already being most directly impacted. How can we do this work in partnership in a way that I'm adding in the words here, but isn't exploitative
Hmm.
or benefits all parties and isn't just extractive of those folks?
Mm.
Absolutely. I saw that question too and really liked it. I think my first approach would be to go in and I'm going to say this slowly because I think it's really important. Actively listen to the voices, ask for feedback, hear what they're saying, and hear it in a way that like you're ready to take action on the words that on the things that they're needing, on the things that they're wanting, and not just going in as like a, well, we already know what we're going to do, but we're hosting this so that you feel included. I think that active listen for action is a big piece that so that they can feel the reciprocal relationship you have, feel like their voices are heard, feel like they can trust you to do what they're asking you to do as a community. Um, that would be my first step, and then from there, gauge. I don't know the amount of input they want to have. You can ask those. I think those questions can always be asked. Of we want to help. We want to do this. This is happening, and we hear what you want. And so, how much a part of that do you want to be? How much a part of that do you have capacity for on top of all the other things you're doing already? Um, that would be my first step to handling that. If Kyle has anything to add on to that.
I think those were great thoughts and comments. And I'm also looking at the time, and we all feel good when we get out early. And so maybe we kind of make some closing remarks. Um, Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for engaging. I know I really enjoyed this, and I'll throw out a couple resource and contact reminders. We've got our emails in the slides. We will have a PDF of the slides with clickable QR codes to the resources we provided. Based on one of the a great conversation I was seeing happening in the chat that had a lot of engagement, I think building on Peter's comment is there was another webinar that I was a part of in the fall of, just 2025. And so maybe I'll update the resource slide and include a link to the recordings of those. And that was done with Puget Sound Institute as well. And we have some economists on it. It was co-hosted by Puget Sound Institute and Industrial Economics and myself. And so I can include that as an additional resource. And that gets into that COM-B method. So the capability, opportunity, motivation, behavior, that there was one link to already. I think I know that we didn't get to every great question and thought in the chat. So please feel free to reach out via email also. And Allie, did you have what am I forgetting?
No, I think you nailed it. Thank you. Thank you for being here and all your thoughtful questions.
And thank you for hosting the planning group. Thank you for hosting. We appreciate the ask and the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you so much. We just have a few wrap-up slides. So, Kyle, if you wouldn't mind stopping the share, I'll unspotlight. And yeah, Rebecca is sharing the wrap-up slides. So as we wrap up, again, thank you so much. We are going to be sending out an email next week, early next week, with a feedback survey, links to the recording and the Shoreline and Coastal Planners Group website. And also in that email, there will be information on the AICP credits if you are interested in that. And again, just a reminder, those credits exist if you need them. And for anyone, if you need proof of attendance at this event, please reach out to me directly. My email will be in that follow-up email that you'll receive. I'm also excited to share that we do have another upcoming event in just about a month from now. So I'm putting a link in the chat to our next Shoreline and Coastal Planners Group event. This is going to be a slightly different event than this. It's going to be way more interactive, and it's going to be seeking interested participants to help validate with their local knowledge and expertise a spatial analysis of sea level rise risk in Puget Sound. For folks who attended a webinar last year in April, this is going to be a follow-up to Ian Miller's Puget Sound Parcel Scale Sea Level Rise Vulnerability Assessment webinar. So if you have local knowledge about flooding impacts along the Puget Sound shoreline and you want to share them in a virtual workshop to help some researchers validate their sea level rise study, please consider joining for that. And as I mentioned, the materials, the recording that Kyle and Ali so wonderfully shared will be posted on the Coastal Planners Group website, which will be linked in the follow-up email. And I think all that's left to say is thank you for attending on behalf of Rebecca, who's with the Department of Ecology, and myself with Washington Sea Grant. Thank you so much for sharing your Friday morning with us. Please reach out to us if you have any questions about the group. And thank you again to Ali and Kyle. If you have questions for them, their contact information will be shared. And we hope we can continue this great discussion. Thank you so much, everybody. Your engagement and comments in the chat and helping each other with resources was fantastic. Thank you for this community of shoreline and coastal managers that we're building, and wishing you a wonderful weekend. Thank you.